All right, let's pick up this issue that's blown up between Australia and the Solomon Islands today. They're due to have their election next year. Now, the government in the Solomon Islands says they got to put that off because they've got international events. They can't afford to do them in the same year. Critics say, well, hang on, that's a pretty cunning move. This is to avoid the will of the people in democratic elections for a very China-friendly PM to stay in power. Now, in response, Foreign Minister Penny Wong, she has told the Solomon Islands, if money's the issue, Australia will fund your elections out of the foreign aid budget. That offer has now prompted a pretty extraordinary attack from PM Sogavare, calling Australia's offer an assault on our democracy, so he says. Joining me now to discuss this and more, my wonderful Wednesday night panel, former Labor MP Michael Danby, who's coming to us tonight from Israel, and Sky News contributor Kosha Garda. Michael, Penny Wong might have been a bit clumsy with her language, but let's not lose sight of Sogavare's games here. He wants to avoid the ballot box. I mean, this is getting sort of Mugabe-like tone to it.
As we speak, in the Solomon's Parliament, he's introducing a bill to delay the elections a year beyond where they should have been. Now, the previous minister may have been a bit of a deal to give him a subsidy for the South Pacific Games, but he says he can't afford to hold both at the same time. And then he has the chutzpah, the cheek, when Australia offers to subsidise both, as long as he holds the elections on time, that we're interfering in their democracy. We've got a real problem, Peter. The fix is in, $35,000 from the Chinese Community Fund to his 32 majority in the Solomon's Parliament. This is going to get worse.
Yeah, I think Michael's absolutely right there, Kosha.
For sure. And I think, what I find interesting, Peter, is the rhetorical devices that he's used, or the savvy, you could say, that he's employed in using these phrases like foreign election interference, threat to democracy, these phrases that have become very increasingly popular in Western nations, against a Western nation like Australia. But I'll make two quick points in this. One, to put it really bluntly, this really is about realpolitik and power. And whether we like it or not, China has it. China is flexing it. And it really does show that Australia is a little bit on the back foot in terms of its ability to really counter that influence of Chinese interests in the region. And the second thing that I think this is going to highlight is a growing fracture in Australia and our counterpart countries everywhere between parts of the electorate that really favor economic nationalism and those who don't. And you're going to see that fracture where there is a position that some are going to take that, as shady as this might be with the Solomon Islands, really, when we are $1 trillion in debt, how much money should we be spending in promoting democracy or helping elections in other countries, when we have many problems at home?
All right, I want to get your take, both of you, on the new Truss cabinet. She met with the Queen overnight, as we know, formally commissioned to form government. She's now the Queen's 15th Prime Minister. The Queen looked quite well, I have to say, at Balmoral, elderly, but of course she is, but she looked quite hale and hearty. There's a bit of a first speech grab I'll play for you now, and then we'll come back to the issue. Let's have a listen.
I will deal hands-on with the energy crisis caused by Putin's war. I will take action this week to deal with energy bills and to secure our future energy supply. I am determined to deliver. Thank you.
She's got a good and strong Defence Minister. I'm not so sure about some of the appointments. I would have loved to see Kemi Badnoch in a front and centre culture portfolio. She got trade, but broadly speaking, Michael, pretty difficult times to take the reins as a new PM. How do you think she'll go?
Well, she's got 40% of the backbench supporting the previous incumbent. She's trying to keep them on side. I think she'll go okay initially. She seems to be realistic about reframing Britain's energy policy. I mean, you'd have to, with poor people paying 5 times the amount of electricity prices they've paid in the past. Nuclear, coal, gas all have to be reconsidered in the mix. And all countries, including Australia, have to understand that they don't seem to understand in any of the CNN or Sky News Britain, base load power. How do we get it and how do we use it?
Oh, spot on. Kosha, I've got to ask you, you follow the issues of TikTok. We know that there's a back end to TikTok and WeChat that's accessed or can be accessed by the Chinese Communist government. There's a review underway now, after some pushing and shoving by the opposition, I might add, in Australia on this very issue. But the opposition, they want to make sure the government doesn't rule out banning these apps if necessary.
Yes, I think there's a couple of angles to this issue, or layers to this issue. One is sovereignty and just going back to that strategy of how to counter Chinese aggression. This is absolutely part of it. Australia led the way with Huawei. You saw Prime Minister Modi ban TikTok and 50 other apps just in the last quarter. So I think that's definitely part of it, and that pressure is mounting. The other thing that's going to put this principle to test, though, is the thing is, other than Chinese apps, American apps also harvest data. And, we saw this network ran into that a little bit with YouTube and Facebook as well. So I think that issue is going to require broader debate, but I think this is a good first step if something happens to counter TikTok and other Chinese apps, as they come into play in Australia.
I've run out of time, Michael. I know you've got some great stories out of Israel, particularly on technology. We might do them next week if we can. I think some of them have got great application to Australia. Kosha and Michael.
Good to be back with the old team. Thanks.
I think so too.